welcome to the Art of Being Human. We have been talking about helping children through their difficulties, helping young people through their difficulties, and we've gone through all kinds of things that we've discussed, and we've been starting to discuss incest. And we have gone through that part of the way. Today on this segment, I want to talk more about incest. What it does to people is terrible, because a lot of times it's young people that go through the worst of it, and then when they leave the home, their younger sisters and brothers get hit with it. And it's just an awful thing, and it has to be stopped. So I'm going to focus right here on how you can know if you are a teacher or a counselor or a coach. How do you know that a child is in trouble? How do you know that they may be suffering something like that? Because I can tell you a lot of kids aren't going to say anything. They're afraid to. They're afraid that their treatment's going to be worse if they let on what they're going through. They're afraid that if they don't get it, one of their sisters or brothers will get it, and they want to protect them. And so you have to have kind of a sharp eye. Plus, there's always a certain amount of guilt involved. Why am I being treated this way? There's something wrong with me. And of course, there's nothing wrong with them. It's just the case of a power play between someone that has more power than somebody that does not have that power. Someone who wants to exert power and dominance in a very unfair way. So I'm going to take it from the perspective of watching for trouble so that you will know what you're looking for. And this is it. I'm giving you a list here. If you see that one child in a family is being significantly treated differently than the other children in the same family, that's a cue that something's wrong. Now, it may not be incest, it may be something else. It may be unfair behavior. It may be the parents are having problems and they're scapegoating a child. It could be a lot of things, but keep your eye out because it also could be that. Arriving at school early and leaving late with no absentees, if at all possible. In other words, the child would rather be at school because they're safer than they are if they're at home. That's something that you have to be mindful of. Now remember, 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 of all of these things I'm listing may not mean anything by themselves. And there could be lots of reasons why a child might act in a certain way. However, you take them all together, and then they can have some very significant information there that you need to maybe intervene on. Now, disruptive behavior toward their parents, that's usually a reaction to stress, running away, alcohol and drug use, promiscuity, which should not occur in a young child, but sometimes does, can be a sign that they're being groomed for sexual behavior by an adult. And it's usually, oh, we have a special relationship, you and I, and we can't talk about it because you're so special. I wouldn't want to have anybody disrupt the special relationship we have. Done in a child's language so that they understand what you mean, but at the same time it doesn't have an ominous ring to it. So that's something to consider. Too much knowledge of sexual activities for a young age. That's a dead giveaway right there. Withdrawal from social relationships, delayed mental development, and this is what I want you to remember about any kind of abuse. If a child is being abused systematically, then their social skills usually stop at the age that they're being abused. So say a child is being abused at age 12, his social development stops at age 12. And he continues with the type of social development at age 12 for however long until somebody is healed, until counseling is given, or whatever. You have to remember here that a child who's 12 years old or younger or even older that has been abused, they don't develop personally. They stay in that rut wherever they are. They don't grow. And as a result of that, their social skills stay at the age where they are when they're abused. And so you have your social development, you have your intellectual development, but when it comes to abuse, it's a case of stopping right there and not proceeding until counseling has come along or until they've been healed in some way. Delayed mental development. Regressive behavior is when you're acting younger than you are. It could be thumb sucking. It could be something like that. And when you get something like that, why are they acting younger? Most kids want to be older. I'm 8.5, I'm 9.5, not I'm 8 or 9. They want to be older. And so when they deliberately act younger, well, maybe they're acting younger because they were more protected at a younger age. They felt more protected at a younger age. And then when that happens, you know that something's amiss in the home because that's just not normal behavior. Acting out, like for example, stealing, whenever a person is misbehaving because they're acting out their anxieties. It could be stealing, it could be getting into fights, as an example. Poor relationships with their friends, poor peer relationships is a sign. They can't seem to make friends. They're overly compliant. They do everything that they're supposed to do plus some. So at that point, you see, you wonder, why are they so compliant? Why are they so good? Why are they trying to be so perfect? It's not natural for a child to want to be perfect. Now, you have wonderful children that do the best that they can, and you always praise them for it. But there's an attempt on their part to be so perfect that they don't have any flaws. You know, one of the dangers for children, if they're very intelligent and if they make good grades, is the day that they fail a test. They think they have actually disappointed the whole world. They fail a test or they do something wrong, then they are the ones that are held up as being such a good example for others, and now they feel they failed everybody. And that sometimes can even lead to a suicidal depression. What do you do with a child who's made a mistake? It's a mistake. We're human. We make mistakes. It doesn't make you any less of a person. It doesn't make you any less valuable. It doesn't make you any less loved. You grow through the mistake and you get better. But you don't judge yourself always by your mistakes. You don't judge your worth by the mistakes you make. And you also don't judge your worth by all of your successes, because then you start to define yourself as a person based on your successes or your failures. Neither one is good. You are a human being first. Your successes come with it. Your failures come with it. It's okay to be a human being. That's what you are. That's what God created you to be. And it's all right either way. So anyway, going on with this, for behavior that's too much like an adult, it's called a pseudo-mature behavior, too much like an adult's behavior. And that's a sign that they're trying too hard to be too perfect. And that doesn't have to be. You just have to be who you are and accept that. So at any rate, lack of trust is another big one. Who can trust a person who's been abusive to them? Nobody can. And so a child that does not trust, usually a young child, it's easy for them to trust an adult because adults have not failed them. Adults have not let them down. And so therefore, they want to be adult. They want to be human. They want to be as advanced as they can. But if you have a real lack of trust, something caused that lack of trust. And in a therapeutic relationship, you may need to know what it was, because it may have been something very serious. It may just also be a growing up kind of problem, but it's something that you really have to watch for. Fear. Anger at males and females. Why would they have fear and anger? They would have fear and anger because they don't trust. They would have fear and anger because they're afraid of something happening to them. You know, the next shoe is absolutely going to drop. And so therefore you have the fear and the anger. If you have a sudden drop in school performance that's unusual for a child, it may be a drug problem, it may be a drinking problem, it may be a bullying problem, but it needs to be looked at. It could also be incest, but I want to say that a lot of the things that I say now can apply to other unhealthy situations, not just incest, but other healthy situations as well. Sleep problems, nightmares, bedwetting, all of that can go along with abuse and can go along with incest. Depression, suicidal thoughts and behavior, due to a feeling of hopelessness and due to a feeling of helplessness. And this you really have to watch carefully. If you have a child and you're a parent and you watch for these things, not that you're kind of casing him out all the time, but if you notice these things, you try to put the dots together and get a picture. Who would be doing something to my child? And then you ask questions. Now, you're not abrasive about it. You can be very gentle about it. It could be just something that the child is going through temporarily, but you need to know what it is, because you need to know that if there is a report of abuse or bullying, that's got to be dealt with. And incest, it's got to be dealt with because it's a lifelong problem. It can become a lifelong problem. And so therefore, you want a child to grow up healthy. You want them to take their rightful place in life. You want them to make all the accomplishments that they can make and have a happy life. And the only way to do that is to help a child have a happy childhood. And so you just need to consider all of these things. Now, moving on from there, I want to get into let's see, a couple of pages over. What about the offender? What about the perpetrator? What about the bullier? What about the person who does the abuse? And I'm looking not so much at family members as outsiders here. What are their characteristics and why do they do it? Now, I want to preface this by saying that there's absolutely no excuse for abuse and it cannot be allowed to continue. But what you can find out sometimes is the bullier has bullied themselves. The bullier, or those who are doing damage to a child, have themselves been very damaged. And although it can't be as an excuse and it can't be allowed to continue, it may give you an understanding point that the person who is causing a child to need help is the person who may need the most help. And so we want to take a look at the offender and the perpetrator and what their characteristics are. What are the characteristics of an abuser? Well, many of them have been abused themselves. They tend to have poor relationships with other people. They tend to have poor information on their role. Every person plays a role. If I were a parent, I'd play the role of the parent. What do parents do? How do parents act? How do parents protect children? These are roles that we have to learn. If I'm a teacher, I need to learn the role of how to become a teacher, how to become a compassionate teacher, how to look for problems in my students so I can step in when I need to step in. But people who are abusing, they don't know what their roles are, being a father, being a mother, being an aunt, or whatever. And a lot of times they pass on abuse because they've been so abused that it seems normal to them, and they're not recognizing that this is abuse. Although some do, some don't. So this is what if you're looking at a situation, you look for something like that as well. They're emotionally needy. They have to have a lot of attention. They need to have a lot of power. A lot of them are mentally ill. There's probably a lot of drug use, a lot of alcohol use. They tend to be immature. They tend to feel powerless. There is, in so many people, a need for power. They've got to have power over other people. That makes them feel important. It may even make them feel loved. People suck up to them, you might say. People want to have relationships with them because they are powerful. They are sitting in a position of power. And, you know, that's a need that we need not have. We need to have, there are other needs that we have that we need to have filled. But being in power over somebody or over a situation isn't something that's awfully healthy for the most part. People feel powerless. And when they feel powerless, what do they want most? Power. How do I get it? Well, maybe I get it by intimidating somebody else. Maybe I get it because I act angry all the time, and then people do what I want them to do because they don't want to face my anger. Now, a lot of people have that anger, and they're always kind of on the verge of an explosion. but they don't realize where it's coming from. It's coming from their need to control and their need to have power. We have a lot of people, and I think everybody to a certain degree, has the need to have control. Because if I have control over a situation, I can pretty much maybe work to get a certain outcome that I want because of my power needs. I need to have a certain thing happen, so I try to arrange for it to happen. That gives me a sense of power. That also gives me a sense of being in control. The problem is we don't really have a whole lot of control over much. Over smaller things, yes, but we don't have a lot of control. And what we have to do, even as Christians, and mainly as Christians, be willing to let go of that control and give it to God who has it anyway, because He's the one who intervenes and makes things right. But for a person who's a perpetrator, that control is important. They want everything and everybody under their thumbs, because they don't want anyone else to know that they're abusing or that they're seeking power. So they act in a different way. They try to control different situations so they will have the power. But that's not a healthy lifestyle either. They feel powerless, so they try to create situations in which they have power or manipulate situations in which they have power. And if they can have that power, then they can have that control that they seek. Now, when you have abuse, there is a control thing here. People who can control, people who are more powerful, take advantages of those who can't defend themselves. And as a result of that, you can get into very, very difficult abusive situations. Now, they really sometimes substitute daughters for wives if it's a father, and they try to treat a daughter like they would treat a wife, in a sense, because they can have more power over their daughter than they could their wife. So you get some substitution of roles. Roles are not sometimes well defined. One of the things that you need to do for healthy relationships, when you get friends, you need to define the relationship. And I'm not saying you sit down and say, okay, what do you want me to do? What should I do for you? It doesn't have to be that stringent, but you seek to know what is it that you expect from somebody else? What is it what they need from you? The relationship gets defined as to what it is, and it can be a healthy definition. Now, a lot of times people who are abusers lack impulse control. They feel they can't help but do what they have to do, and so therefore they lack that control. They will rationalize, that is, they will give excuses for the actions that they take. And if it's a father or if it's a mother, home is their domain, home is their kingdom, and you had better kind of line up and follow the rules or else. You know that statement, mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy. In other words, you've got to do what she says or else, and that you don't want to get into. You want children to be able to grow up in a creative fashion. Yes, there has to be rules. Yes, there has to be regulations, but you don't want to step on them. You want to let them grow and be creative and develop into whatever their selves are supposed to be for them to be happy. So in a home situation where there's abuse, somebody wants control of the household. Somebody wants to have the home as their domain. And if it's a man, they will tend to think that the wife exists only to meet their needs, only to meet their needs. And that's a wrong way of looking at things. Children the same way. They are there to meet the parents' needs, or they're there so that the parents can take advantage of them. It's not a healthy situation. And the people who are abusers, they can be very, very likable on the outside. There are a lot of people who are abusers, and you get to know them, and they're friendly and all of that. But if you were to look at their home life, it suddenly changes, and it becomes a monster place rather than a safe haven for a family to get together, to grow together, and to be together, and then for people to take their places and become creative and lead a life that's satisfying for them. Well, I'm going to close it here because we're just about out of this, and I will start off next time and complete this And then we want to get into a bullying situation and how to handle bullying, because that's also a type of abuse, different from incest, but abuse is abuse in many forms. So we'll close it here. Please join me next time.